Welcome to a video about designing a label for a recipe in Foodworks.online. You can design labels in nutrition labeling workspaces, which you have access to as part of a nutrition labeling or duo subscription or with a free trial. In today's video, I will discuss each of the labeling sub-tabs, including general, NIP, ingredients, statements, country of origin labeling, HSR, and shelf life. And we'll finish by detailing how to copy and export label information from Foodworks. To design a label, you will first need to open the relevant recipe in your workspace and navigate to the labeling tab. I will be working in this spicy tomato and lentil soup recipe that I created in a previous video about creating recipes, which will be linked in the video description and in the related articles section at the end of this support article. There are a variety of sub-tabs on the labeling tab, which I will discuss in depth to help you design your labels. I also recommend selecting the label option on the analysis pane so you can view your label updating in real time as you make changes. Note that any label settings you change apply to the label for the specific recipe and not any others in the workspace. The first sub-tab is the General sub-tab, which includes a variety of fields. The first field is the alternate label name field. By default, for the title displayed at the top of the label, Foodworks uses the name assigned to the recipe. However, if you need to assign a different name to the label, you can use this field. The name for my recipe is also the name I wish to appear on the label. However, I will show you that if I write text in this field, it will replace the existing label name. This field is helpful if you have particular naming conventions for organizing your resources in Foodworks and they do not match up with the names you wish to appear on the product label. I will remove this example name and move to the label description field. You can use the label description field to display text below the label name. Information you may like to include here is a description of the food product. To show you how this appears on the label, I will write an example sentence. The next field is the serves per pack field, which you need to complete to display a number of servings next to the servings per package heading on a label. If you do not fill in this field, a question mark will appear on the label instead. As an example, if this packet of soup contained 2 servings, I would write 2 in this field. The next field is the serving size description field, which you can use to add a description for the serving size, which is defined in the ingredients tab of your recipe. The serving size description will appear in brackets alongside the serving size heading on a label. As an example, I will write 1 small bowl. The next option on the General sub-tab is the Show per 100 milliliters, not per 100 grams checkbox, which you can select to display the per 100 milliliters column instead of the per 100 grams column on the label. This is helpful if the product is a liquid. When this checkbox is selected, you can see the serving size changes from grams to milliliters. The average quantity per 100 grams column changes to 100 milliliters, and the measurement displayed at the bottom of the HSR graphic changes to milliliters. I will unselect this checkbox for my recipe to revert all the measurements back to grams. The next field is preparation instructions, which you can use to add preparation instructions to the label. I will write an example in this box. The next field is storage instructions, which you can use to add storage instructions to the label. If there are storage instructions already existing in your workspace, they will be available from the drop-down. If there are none, you can type storage instructions to create them. I will write an example in this box and add it. This text is now available to select for other labels in the workspace from the storage instructions drop-down. This is useful if you are creating many similar products and they all have the same storage instructions. The next field is the message field, which you can use to add additional text to the bottom of the label as required. I will write some text here as an example. The last field is the net weight field, which you can use to add the weight of the package contents in grams. For example, this packet has 2 servings of soup that each weigh 206 grams, so I could write 412 grams here. The next sub-tab is the NIP tab, or Nutrition Information Panel tab, where you can enable the relevant nutrients and customize how and what you would like to display in the Nutrition Information Panel. In the NIP nutrients box, you can see that the required nutrients to include on a label as per the Food Standards Code cannot be modified. However, in this workspace, additional nutrients are also available for inclusion on the label, and if I select the checkboxes, the nutrients will appear on the label. If you do not see the option to select a particular nutrient, you will first need to enable the display of that nutrient in your workspace settings. You can also toggle on % daily intake, which will display the % contribution of a serving of this recipe to the average daily nutrient intake recommendations. You can also enable recommended dietary intake and estimated safe and adequate daily dietary intake percentages on your label by selecting the checkboxes for the desired nutrients. A more in-depth video about these percentages is available and will be linked in the related articles section at the bottom of this support article. Additional customization for displaying nutrient values in the Nutrition Information Panel can also be enabled or disabled on this tab. The first is using Fazan's rounding rules. If I toggle this on, Foodworks applies rounding rules required to comply fully with the Food Standards Code. However, this might not always be appropriate, for example, if this recipe will be used as a raw material by another food manufacturer. The next toggle is to show calories alongside kilojoules on the label. Currently, my label only shows kilojoules for the energy content, but when I toggle this on, the equivalent calorie value is displayed in brackets. The next is to display the words less than next to a number for small values rather than giving the actual value. The additional option, use Fazan's minimum values, controls whether to use the minimums permitted in the Food Standards Code or not. I will toggle on both of these options and you will notice how my label updates. The last option is to round nutrient values that may be considered insignificant to 0. I do not have any nutrient values with a number less than 0.001, so when I toggle this on, nothing will occur. But in cases that you do have values with a number less than 0.001, you can toggle this on so 0 will be showed instead. The next sub-tab is the Ingredients tab, where you can toggle on any ingredient groups, characterizing ingredients, and characterizing components you would like to display on your label. Ingredient groups are categories you define, such as fruit, nuts, or spices, to group ingredients when they appear in the ingredients list of a nutrition label. This allows an ingredient to be declared in ingredients lists as part of that group. For example, if the raw materials cashews and almonds have been assigned to the ingredient group nuts, then they can appear in the ingredient statement on a label as nuts, open bracket, cashews, almonds, close bracket. Note that you assign a raw material to an ingredient group on the General tab of that raw material. Those ingredient groups would then be available here to enable for your label. The raw materials in my recipe are not assigned to ingredient groups, so I have none to select here. Characterizing ingredients are ingredients or categories of ingredients in a food product that are either mentioned by name in the food product, are usually associated with the name of the food by consumers, or are emphasized on the food label in either words, graphics, or pictures. When you set a characterizing ingredient, the proportion of that ingredient is displayed beside the ingredient's declaration name in the ingredients list. As tomato and lentil is mentioned in my recipe name, I will select the checkboxes next to these ingredients, and you will notice that the ingredient statement updates to include percentages next to these ingredients. Similarly, characterizing components are components of a food product that are usually associated with the name of the food by consumers. When you set a characterizing component, the proportion of that component is displayed as a statement at the end of the ingredients list, which describes the proportion of that component in the food product. In Foodworks, characterizing components are only available for cocoa solids and milk fat. These components would need to first be toggled on in the workspace settings, which you would only do if your food was associated with cocoa solids or milk fat. For example, chocolate. My recipe does not contain these components and they have not been enabled in my workspace settings, so they are not available here for me to select. If you need to be reminded about any of these fields, you can simply hover over the information icons and text will appear to explain what each of these options are for. These information icons are super helpful if you are just learning how to use Foodworks Online for the first time. You can see the information for particular fields and features and click links to supporting articles. Or if you have been using Foodworks for a while, you may simply like to use these information icons for some quick reminders. The next tab is the Statements tab, where you can declare may contain statements as well as warning and advisory statements. In the may contain section, if you have allergens that are declared as maybe on the recipe overrides tab, you can choose to show them in a may contain statement on the label with the toggle in this box. You can then select for the statement to say either may contain or may be present. To display warning and advisory statements, simply select the checkbox next to any warning and advisory statements that are relevant to your recipe. Warning and advisory statements must be provided for certain foods or ingredients which may cause health risks for some consumers. For example, a food product containing the ingredient royal jelly is required to have a warning statement which states that this product contains royal jelly which has been reported to cause severe allergic reactions and, in rare cases, fatalities, especially in asthma and allergy sufferers. For more information, see Standard 1.2.3 and Schedule 9 of the Food Standards Code. If you have previously declared any of the listed warning and advisory statement options when entering the nutritional composition of any raw materials or sub-recipes, a warning message will display in the Error and Warnings drop-down that prompts you to display the required advisory statement. The next sub-tab is the Country of Origin Labelling tab, where you define how you would like to declare the % Australia content. First, you can toggle to show country of origin labeling on the label or not, then select the country of origin from the drop-down list, for example, Australia. Then choose the statement type, either made in, grown in, product of, or packed in. If any of the options are unavailable, this indicates that selecting these options would not be compliant with the Food Standards Code. You can discover the reason why by hovering over the information icon on the non-selectable options. For my recipe, I will select Made In. Then, set whether this is a priority food or a non-priority food as defined by the Country of Origin Food Labelling Information Standard 2016. If this is a priority food, the standard marks will be shown. If this is a non-priority food, you will need to choose whether to show standard marks or not. Next, you can change the orientation of the country of origin graphic to suit different types of packaging such as landscape or portrait. You can also select the ingredient sources vary phrase and add text in the additional information box. Enabling this will override any of the information in the highlighted ingredients phrase box unless the % Australia is 0 or 100. This text should advise your consumers on how to find more information about the product, for example, through a telephone number or a website address. Finally, you can also enter the name of a highlighted ingredient in the highlighted ingredients phrase box, which will show it within the bounds of the country of origin labeling graphic. The next sub-tab is the HSR tab, or Health Star Rating tab, which you can use if you decide you would like to print a Health Star rating on your label. To include the HSR graphic, simply toggle it on, then select which version of the graphic you wish to display from the following options: HSR only, HSR and energy, or HSR and energy and 3 prescribed nutrients. Then, select the HSR mark orientation such as landscape, portrait left, or portrait right. You may also check the box next to QR code to display a quick response code on the label. Companies are encouraged to display a Health Star Rating QR code that directs consumers to the Health Star Rating website when scanned. Lastly, on the Shelf Life sub-tab, you can toggle on Shelf Life and define how long it will take for the food to perish. The first section is the date marking section, which is used to define the statement type for the shelf life marking on a label. For example, used by, best before, baked on, or baked for. The second field is the shelf life field, which is used to display the date alongside the date marking. You can either enter a number of days and the date will be calculated for you, or you can enter a date manually. For example, if I type 100 days, it will calculate the date 100 days from today's date, or I can simply type the date in manually. The final field is the secondary shelf life field, which is used for an additional shelf life statement, for example, after opening, consume within 7 days. This information is not displayed in the label produced by Foodworks, but can be viewed in CSV exports, which I will touch on in a minute. Now that we have discussed all of the subtabs in the labeling section, I will quickly mention how you can extract the label information from Foodworks Online. If you wish to generate a PNG of your label, simply select Generate PNG and it will download immediately. This option is valuable if you do not wish to make changes to the format or styling of the label generated in Foodworks. You can also copy your label information to your clipboard to be pasted into a word processing app such as Microsoft Word or Google Docs. To do this, select the Copy Label button to copy your label to your clipboard. Once copied, you can paste the content in the third-party app as required. You can also copy the country of origin and health star rating information by using the Copy Country of Origin Labeling and Copy HSR buttons. You can also export the labeling information for the resources within your workspace to CSV files. To do this, in your open workspace, click on the Tools tab in the navigation pane. Then, on the Export tab under the Filter heading, define what resources you would like to include in the label based on the resource type or applied tags. You can then see the results of this filter in the Filter Results container and then select Export. Depending on the size of what you are exporting and how many other Foodworks users are also exporting, this may take some time. You can click the Files tab to view the progress of your download, and when it is complete, you can click the Download option to immediately download a zip file containing the data. For information about converting a CSV file into a Microsoft Access Database or TAB file, and to read about the exported labeling information, please read the support articles in the video description or in the related articles section at the bottom of this support article. Finally, you can also download health star rating and country of origin labeling assets on the Assets tab. This brings us to the end of the video about designing your label in a Foodworks Online Nutrition Labelling workspace. To access more video resources, please click the thumbnail on this screen. Thank you for watching.